All right, buckle up, everybody, because today we're diving into a topic that's truly fascinating, even a little mysterious 80 syndrome.
It is a good one, lots to unpack.
Yeah, we got some great questions from you all about it. You definitely want to go deeper than just the surface level, so get ready for a deep dive.
I'm excited to get into it. 80 syndrome, while not life-threatening, really offers a unique window into how intricate our nervous system truly is.
I'm all about that. So let's start with the basics. For anyone who's maybe hearing about this for the first time, what exactly are we talking about when we say 80 syndrome?
So 80 syndrome, which is also known as Holmes-Adie syndrome, is a neurological condition that's thankfully not super common. It affects about 2 in 1,000 people, and basically it disrupts the autonomic nervous system.
And for our listeners who might not be as familiar with the autonomic nervous system, it's basically like the behind the scenes crew of our bodies, right? It's
Yeah.
running the show for all those functions we don't even have to think about: our breathing, our heart rate, digestion.
Right, all this stuff that just happens automatically, hence the name.
Exactly. And you know where this is going, controlling our pupils too.
You got it. And when something disrupts this intricate system, you can get some really peculiar effects. In the case of 80 syndrome, one of the most telltale signs is, well, right there in the eye, the pupil.
Okay, so let's talk about this 80s pupil, because this seems to be a real hallmark of the syndrome. What exactly are we looking at here?
Well, what happens is the pupil, which is usually nice and responsive, it becomes dilated, so bigger than usual, and then it gets really slow to react to changes in light, especially compared to the other eye.
So imagine you're walking from like a bright room into a darker one. Most people, their pupils adjust pretty quickly. But with 80s pupil, it's almost like that eye is taking its sweet time to catch up.
That is the perfect way to put it.
Yeah.
And it's often pretty noticeable. People with this condition might pick up on it themselves, or someone else will point it out, and eventually that's what leads to a diagnosis.
Interesting. Now, I'm curious about this, and maybe this is getting ahead of ourselves, but we know this condition seems to be more common in women, especially young adults. Any idea why that might be?
You know, that's a great question, and honestly, it's one that researchers are still trying to fully understand. There are some theories, of course, but no definite answers just yet.
Oh, I love a good medical mystery. Let's hear these theories.
Well, one thought is that hormones might play a role. We see hormonal fluctuations affecting all sorts of things in the body, so it stands to reason they might be involved here too. But again, more research is needed.
Wow, so it's like a little puzzle we're trying to piece together.
This is what makes this field so interesting, right?
Absolutely. So we've got this unusual pupil behavior, and it's more common in women, particularly young adults. What else should we know about it? So we've got this unusual pupil behavior, and it's more common in women, particularly young adults. What else should we know about it?
Well, it's important to remember that 80's pupil, or more accurately 80 syndrome, doesn't limit itself to just the eyes. Remember, we talked about the autonomic nervous system being responsible for a whole bunch of functions, right? Well, other parts of that system can be affected too.
Right. You mentioned something earlier about tendon reflexes. You're not talking about that knee-jerk test they do at the doctor's office, are you?
Exactly. Some people with 80 syndrome, they also experience what we call reduced or even absent tendon reflexes. You might notice it most in the Achilles tendon.
So instead of that typical jerk when the doctor taps your tendon, there might be little or no movement.
Exactly. And that's another clue that the nerves responsible for those signals, they aren't really functioning quite the way they should.
Okay, so it's not just the eyes, it's this broader neurological picture, right? Are there any other symptoms that we should have on our radar?
Yeah, so some people with 80s also report changes in how they sweat. They might sweat a lot in certain areas or find that they sweat less than they used to. It can be kind of strange.
Wow, that is strange. So even though it's called 80s pupil, it's clearly about more than just the eye, right? We're seeing how even what might seem like a minor little hiccup in the nervous system can create these like ripple effects throughout the body.
It really highlights how interconnected our bodies are,
Yeah.
right? Like something that seems like an isolated symptom can actually be a clue to a much broader issue.
It's all connected. And speaking of connections, I can't help but think there must be other conditions that can cause weird things to happen with our pupils, right? How can we be sure it's 80s pupil and not something else entirely?
You are absolutely right to consider other possibilities. There are definitely a few other conditions that can cause pupil abnormalities. But 80s people, it has some very specific traits that set it apart.
Okay, so let's play medical detective for a minute. What are some of those other pupil-related conditions, and how do their symptoms differ from 80s?
Okay, so one to be aware of is called Argyll-Robertson pupil. Now, this condition, it also involves pupils that don't react normally to light. But here's the catch with this one. Both pupils are affected, and they're usually constricted, so smaller than normal, not bigger. Plus, Argyll-Robertson pupil is often linked to late-stage syphilis, which is a whole other story.
Okay, so that's a pretty big difference right there. With 80s, it's usually just the one pupil that's dilated, right? Not both. What other pupil imposters should we be on the lookout for?
Good question. Another one is called Hutchinson's pupil. So with this one, you again have a pupil that's fixed and dilated, but the cause is totally different. It's usually due to compression of the oculomotor nerve.
The oculomotor nerve. That sounds serious.
It can be. Often this compression is caused by something like a mass in the brain. So again, very different from 80s.
Wow, so we've got all these different ways a pupil can act up, but for entirely different reasons. Okay, so just to bring it all home for our listeners, can we compare a classic case of 80s pupil to a normal, healthy pupil?
Absolutely. So think of a normal pupil, like that perfectly calibrated automatic door. It opens wide in dim lighting to let in more light, and then it narrows quickly in bright light to protect the eye. Seamless. But with 80s pupil, it's more like that door is a little hesitant, slow to react to those changes in light.
Ooh, I like that analogy. It's like it didn't get the memo to adjust. And it's not just about how it reacts to light, is it? I was reading that 80s pupil, it has this weird response to near objects, too, almost like it has its priorities mixed up.
You're exactly right. So while it's sluggish to light, it actually tends to constrict more than a normal pupil when you're focusing on something up close. And it's like the wiring got crossed somewhere along the way.
Talk about a unique set of symptoms. It's like having a little puzzle right there in your eye. This is where it gets really interesting for me. We've got all these very specific symptoms, but what's the root cause? What's going on in the body that actually causes 80 syndrome in the first place?
That's the million-dollar question. And unfortunately, it's still a bit of a medical mystery. 80 syndrome, more often than not, is what we call idiopathic, which basically means we don't know the exact cause.
So it's like a medical whodunit, but we've got to have some clues, right? What do we know about what might be happening at the cellular level?
We do have some good leads. The evidence seems to point towards nerve damage being a key factor, particularly in two areas: the ciliary ganglion, which is located right behind the eye, and the dorsal root ganglion, which is part of this network of nerves that relays sensory information to the brain.
Okay, so it's like these nerve centers, they're experiencing some sort of disruption, and that's what leads to the weird pupil behavior and the other symptoms, right?
Exactly. Now, the exact way this disruption happens, that's still being studied. But researchers believe that inflammation is probably a major player. It's as if these nerves are being irritated somehow, and that messes with their ability to function properly.
That makes sense. So what could be causing this inflammation? Is it something people are just born with, or could something trigger it?
Well, that's part of the mystery, right? In some cases, there might be some kind of event, like an infection, viral or bacterial, or maybe an injury, even eye surgery, that seems to act as a trigger.
So you're saying that something that seems completely unrelated could be the thing that sets it all in motion. That's wild.
It's pretty incredible, isn't it? But anyway, let's say someone starts noticing these symptoms. How do they even know if they have 80 syndrome? I imagine it takes a specialist to connect the dots.
Right. Like, how do you even diagnose something like this?
You're right. It often does require a trained eye, literally. An ophthalmologist, which is just a fancy word for an eye doctor, would be the expert to see. They would do a very thorough eye exam, including something called a slit lamp examination.
Slit lamp examination, that sounds intense. What makes that different from a regular eye exam?
So basically, it allows the doctor to get a magnified view of the structures inside your eye. They use this high-intensity beam of light, that's where the slit lamp name comes from, to illuminate everything and look for any abnormalities. This way, they can really scrutinize how the pupil reacts to the light, which is super important in diagnosing 80s.
Ah, so it's all about getting a closer look. Makes sense. And didn't you mention that there's also a special kind of eye drop they can use in the diagnosis?
You've got a great memory. Yes, they're called diluted pilocarpine eye drops. And what's fascinating about these drops is that they actually make the pupil constrict. So in a person with 80s, the affected pupil, it'll often constrict way more than a normal pupil would in response to those drops.
Oh, interesting. So it's like its sensitivity is heightened in a way because of that nerve damage we were talking about.
Yeah, exactly. It's like another way to confirm that the pupil is not reacting the way it normally should.
And this is a perfect example of why getting the right diagnosis is so important. Even though, like you said, it's not life-threatening, you wouldn't want to miss something else that could be more serious.
You're absolutely right. There are other things out there that might look similar on the surface, but need totally different treatment plans. So yeah, always better to get it checked out.
Absolutely. Don't mess around with your health. So let's say someone is diagnosed with Achilles syndrome. What does that mean for their day-to-day life? Are we talking about a lifetime of vision problems?
The good news is Addy syndrome doesn't usually cause severe vision loss or anything like that. It doesn't usually require any major lifestyle changes either, but like we've been talking about, it can create some visual challenges that people might need to manage.
Okay, so what kind of challenges are we talking about specifically?
Well, light sensitivity is a big one.
Mhm.
Because that effect in pupil isn't constricting as efficiently as it should, it basically means more light is getting into the eye, which can make bright environments pretty uncomfortable.
Yeah, I can see how that would be annoying. Anything else?
Some people, they might also experience blurry vision, both up close and at a distance. And depth perception can be a bit wonky too.
Oh, wow. I bet that could make things tricky. What about those times when you're going from a super bright setting to a dark one, like walking into a movie theater after being outside?
Yes, that's another thing. Adjusting to darkness can be slower and more difficult with an 80s pupil. Remember that pupil is already dilated and slow to react, so it just takes that much longer for it to adjust to those low light conditions.
So, not exactly life-altering, but definitely some quirks that people might need to learn to live with. Are there things people can do to manage these challenges, though?
Absolutely. There are definitely ways to make things easier. An eye doctor might recommend something as simple as tinted glasses to help with glare and light sensitivity.
Yeah.
Or, if needed, they might prescribe special eyeglasses for near and distance vision to help sharpen things up. It really depends on the person.
That makes sense. So, it's really about finding what works for you.
Exactly. The key, like with so many health things, is open communication with your doctor. Let them know what you're experiencing, and they can help you find the best solutions for your needs.
So important. Don't just suffer in silence, talk to your doctor. It sounds like with the right approach, people can live totally normal lives with AD syndrome.
Absolutely. And honestly, just knowing about it, understanding what's going on, that's half the battle. Knowledge is power.
100%. Well, this has been an incredible deep dive. We've journeyed into the mysterious world of Eddy syndrome, explored its causes, or lack thereof, should I say, and even uncovered its connection to the broader nervous system. It's amazing how something as seemingly simple as a pupil can hold so many secrets.
It really makes you appreciate how complex the human body is. We still got so much to learn.
That's so true. Maybe this deep dive will inspire some of you listening to pay a little closer attention to those little signals your body sends. Even the things that seem insignificant could be important clues. Or maybe it's just sparked your curiosity about the brain and the nervous system. Whatever it may be, we hope this deep dive has given you not just a deeper understanding of Eddy syndrome, but also a sense of wonder about this amazing, complex world that exists within each and every one of us. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. See you next time.